So everyone, it's time to go over probably the most important part about this advanced guide, and it's going to be the damage calculation. Now there is of course a web page on the damage calculation on the fandom wiki for Magia Record, but does have some issues, at least one problem with it that I'm going to talk about later. So instead I have a different page that is based on information gathered from Japanese sources. I think as well the Aruma Japanese wiki is in here as well. So all this compiled information I'm going to go over, and I'm also going to link this in the description below, but I'm also going to cross-reference the damage calculation page on the wiki. And more importantly, there's going to be lots of numbers, lots of mathematics going on, but don't worry about it. If you don't like mathematics, this is the perfect video for you, because even though I'm going to give you all the mathematics, I'm then going to tell you what that actually means and what you should, because of all the mathematics I'm telling you, actually be doing in the game, what sort of decision making you should be thinking about. So I will give you mathematics, but I will also give you just clear-cut information on what you should or shouldn't do. First off though, let's start out with an overview on how damage actually is calculated in the game. First off, we start with calculating the base damage. You could also call this the base attack value, and how you get to this base damage is just a whole bunch of stuff with having to do with your attack and the defense of the enemy. So basically we'll have to figure out, what does attack actually mean? What does defense actually mean? You have these values in your character sheet. Like for example, if you look at Best Girl for a second, Best Girl of course has some attack value. Best Girl has some defense value down here. What does all of this actually mean in terms of trying to figure out how much damage we're doing, and what are awakening bonuses? What even are those? Let's figure all of that out. First off, we need to calculate how much attack our character actually has. So we start off by having to calculate the effective attack. That is basically the attack as well as the defense that a character basically starts the fight with minus buffs. So if your character had no buffs on them, you just put them on a field and you ask yourself, okay, how much attack does this character actually have right now? First off, you start with the base value. The base value is just the value that you see right here. For example, a 5-star Ren at maximum level would have 9,128 base attack. Nice. Next up, we need to add the awakening bonus. It says 100 plus awakening in percent. Basically, it's just mathematics speech for saying you get this on top of your attack. So attack on top of your 9,128, you then get plus 8% attack. Wow, cool. Same with HP and defense, of course. We're going to get through the disc values later, but for now, we're only focusing on attack and defense. So you get that on top of that as well. And once you have multiplied that, then plus that, you get the Memoria bonus. Important thing to watch out for at this point, if it says, like down here, plus 8%, it means plus 8% on the base damage. You have the Memoria value next to that, but the Memoria value does not get this 8% attack. The reason why I'm stressing this is because in the game lies to you. If you have a Ren that has, let's say, this base value right here with the awakening bonus, it will still say that she has 9,128 attack. You slap a Memoria on there that gives 2,000 attack, it will tell you you have 11,128 attack. That's wrong, because the base attack gets this plus 8%. That's not factored in there. So already the game is lying to you. I'm sorry to break it to you, but the game is lying to you. Then at that point, on top of that, you have the base attack that your character has, but it also matters what the formation is. So for example, you have the Tercio formation, for example, where it has a node. For example, for the Dark node, there is a node that gives you defense up and attack double up. So you, for example, down here you see these formation bonuses. For attack double up, that would be a plus 15%. This is a per mil sign. It basically means not out of 100, but out of 1,000. Basically, there's just an extra 0. If you remove the extra 0, you're at percent. Yay. So this is plus 15% attack, and it would be a plus 10% on defense. The reason why this one doesn't list attack triple up is because this is compiled from Japanese information, and Tercio is the only formation in the game that has attack triple up, and the Japanese server does not have Tercio. So only NA gets Tercio, only NA has attack triple up, which is 25% attack up. So if our Ren was standing on that dark spot in a dark Tercio, she would get plus 15% attack on top of all of this, and plus 10% defense on top of this. So this is basically the attack and defense value that your character hits the field with. Of course, you might have buffs. Let's say, for example, you have this amazing Memoria, the sword which strikes in the space between light and dark. So if you equip your Ren with the sword which strikes in the space between light and dark, and you had full HP, because you see this attacker while at max health, then the sword which strikes in the space between light and dark would give you a total of 45% attack, which is pretty insane for a single Memoria, but if you are already aware of this Memoria, then a sword which strikes in the space between light and dark is indeed one of the best Memoria in the game. So you put that on top of here, so if you had a sword which strikes in space between light and dark, you would have your base attack that we have already calculated as the 9128 for Ren, plus the 8% for the awakening bonus, plus let's say 4000 from Memoria, and then on top of all of that, this all gets smushed together, and this smush then also gets the formation on top of that, so another plus 15% on top of that, and then on top of that, with the sword which strikes in space between light and dark, it's another 45% on top of that. That's a lot of attack. But this is just for attack up. You might also know something about an effect called damage up and damage increase up. What is that? We're gonna get to that later. But first off, we're still in the realm of attack and defense, okay? So of course you do the same with defense as well, and there's also defense buffs that are applied here. So okay, now we know what sort of attack our Ren has, and we know what sort of defense our Ren has when we put her on the board on this specific formation. But then we need to ask ourselves another question. If we attack an enemy, what does defense actually do? If an opponent has 15,000 defense, what does that mean? What does 15,000 actually stand for? And the base damage tells us what this actually stands for. When you attack an enemy, you put your attack right here. So let's say our Ren with all these crazy buffs is at like 20,000 attack. Or no, let's say 15,000 attack. It's better to work with, especially because I've prepared something that uses 15,000 in an example. So let's say we have 15,000 attack, and we're now attacking an enemy. Let's say we're attacking something like Economy, and she has like a 5,000 defense. And she has no defense buffs, no defense bonus from formation, no other bonuses in here. Let's just say she has 5,000 defense in here. How does that actually interact with our damage? Basically, you take the 15,000 attack that we have, and you subtract from that this 5,000 divided by 3. So, if we take our trusty little calculator out, 15,000 divided by 3 is about 1,666. So about 1,700 if you round a bit nicely. So our 15,000 is now getting reduced by about 1,700. And this attack value that we arrive at then, this is the actual damage that this attack would deal. So now we arrive at a conundrum, not a conundrum, but we arrive at a lot of questions. What does this actually, this is a bunch of mathematics, but what does this actually mean for the game? Should I stack attack? Should I stack defense? Is there even any value in defense? Is defense even good? Is defense terrible? What should I be doing? And for that, I've got some example right here that I've prepared for you guys. So let's say we have a character with 15,000 attack, our Ren with all the buffs, and we attack someone who has 5,000 defense. Because defense gets calculated in the way that it does according to this formula, we then see that, as I just told you, we lose about 1,666 of our attack, and we would drop down to 13,334 attack. That's about 11% drop from the initial 15,000. Don't worry, I'm going to arrive at a very important lesson in a bit, but you need to go with me step by step. I promise you there's gold at the end of this rainbow, even if the rainbow is a bit mathematically weird. But look, let's look at instead at attacking someone who has 10,000 defense. our attack would drop to this value, which is in total a 22% drop from our 15,000. And you see that the more, every time we add 5,000 defense, our attack drops by like 1,666, by like a third of that. So it's a linear decrease in our attack the more defense the enemy has. And if we were to attack someone with 30,000 defense, our attack would actually drop to 5,000, which is pretty much nothing. So if there were no other buffs at play, it's really just 15,000 attack Ren attacks like another Ren who has somehow 30,000 defense, we would only be dealing 5,000 damage. At least base damage. There's much of other stuff later. But for now, let's just say we're going to deal 5,000 damage. Not a whole lot. We would like to deal a lot more because 15,000 attack, that's quite a lot. But we're not worrying right now about the attack. Let's look more into the defense aspect. So the thing about the defense is it might seem like just adding 5,000 defense is always having the same impact. It's always just 11% drop. So going from 5,000 to 10,000 is pretty much the same as going from 25,000 to 30,000, right? No. In fact, if you have little defense, adding a bunch of defense to that is terrible. If you have a lot of defense, adding a bit of defense to that is really fucking good. Why? Mathematics is the answer. If we were to compare these damage values that we get from this, and we see, for example, from this 13,334 that we got from the 5,000 defense going to 11,667 defense attack, which was the 10,000 defense, so we're adding 5,000 defense. By adding 5,000 defense, we have reduced the amount of damage we are receiving by 12.5%. So here, 5,000 defense reduced the damage by 12.5%. That's pretty good. But we can do better. If we went from 10,000 to 15,000 defense, we would actually be reducing the damage by 14.3%. Oh wow, we're reducing damage by more. If we go from 15,000 to 20,000, we are reducing the damage by 16.7. You're kind of seeing where this is going. If we're going from 25,000 to 30,000, we're reducing the damage by 25%. That's quite a lot. So you see, going from 5,000 to 10,000 is only half as effective as going from 25,000 to 30,000. Defense becomes a lot more powerful the more you have of it. Now, what does this actually mean for the decision making that we need to be doing? Let's imagine we have a Memoria that gives 30% defense up, okay? And we think we should give this Memoria to someone who dies a lot. Let's say, for example, we want to give it to Ren, because Ren only has like 6,800 defense. I didn't show it, but believe me, just like 6,000 defense is like not a whole lot. So let's say we now want to put a Memoria, or just a 30% damage buff on our Ren. If we have our Ren, I just noted down as 5,000. Let's say we have someone with 5,000 defense, and we gave that person a 33% damage defense buff. They would reach 6,667 defense. If we were to compare that against the 15,000 attack, we would get a damage reduction, or an attack reduction, of only 4.2%. That's like nothing. But if we had someone who already has 15,000 defense, and we gave that person another 33% defense buff, we would get to 20,000 defense. And we know from above that's a 16.7 defense, 16.7% attack damage reduction. So it's not just, of course, if we have 15,000 and we add a bunch of percent on top of that, and we compare that to 5,000, of course the 15,000 is going to have more use out of this 33% than the 5,000 defense has. But you also put on top of that the idea that we've established above, that the more you have of defense, the more useful it is. This basically means there's a double dip. There's a double dip in how effective defense buffs are at high values. So basically what I want you to take away from this is, if you have a character that has not a whole lot of defense, don't give that character more defense. It will do nothing. Our 33%, that's quite a lot, like 33% defense buff on a character who has 5,000 defense, reduces damage by maybe like 4%. 4%, that's nothing. Against 15,000 attack. If the character had 20,000 attack, it would be even less than that. but if the character had like 10,000 attack, it would be a lot more than that. So it kind of depends on the attack you're comparing it against. But 15,000 attack is pretty decent for what an attacking character who also has on-field buffs, like attack buffs, might have. So 15,000 is actually pretty decent for what an offensive character would attack you with. So it will only reduce the damage by 4%. But on your tank that might have like 15,000%, if you gave this guy a 33% defense buff, suddenly you reduce the damage by 16%, almost 17%. So you see, defense is useless if you have almost none of it, and buffing the defense of someone who has not a whole lot is even more useless. Instead, put all your defense on one character and have that be the defense character, and then buff those guys' defense with defense buffs, and then you will actually get a really high amount of defense that reduces enemy attack by a lot. And you can really start tanking. Don't try to turn characters that don't have a lot of defense into tanks with defense buffs. It's terrible, does nothing. Put all your defense buffs on someone who has a lot of defense. That's what I want you guys to take away from this damage calculation. Defense is only good if you have a lot of it. If you don't have a lot of it, forget about defense. Don't even try to get defense on someone who doesn't have defense. I'm stressing this point a lot because I see this coming up a lot, where people in mirrors, they put defensive Memoria on characters like Ren, who doesn't have a lot of defense, and I'm scratching my head because knowing this information we have now, I hope you are also scratching your head now, because now you know it doesn't do anything. Take something like a Kokoro, take something like a Sayaka. If you are on the Japanese server and Spirit Enhancement has been unlocked, Sayaka can hit the field with like well over 20,000 defense, and then you give her a Memoria that has like 40% defense up or something like, I don't have it open right now. There's the Kokoro Memoria that isn't on NA right now, but there's a Kokoro Memoria that gives like 40% or something defense buff, and your Sayaka is going to be somewhere over 30,000 defense. And if you imagine 30,000 defense, what that does, what something like 30,000 defense does to someone, reduces their 15,000 attack to 5,000 attack. That's actually insane. So you see, you can reach really high amount of defense values, and those really high amount of defense values will have a use. But this is mostly for Japanese servers right now. Of course, you can still do the defense stacking on NA servers. It just won't be as ridiculously effective as it is on JP. Just to give you guys a bit of a example, my cool Homura hits opponents with like 60 to 70,000 blast damage hits without a crit. On Sayaka, she does like 10,000. So it's pretty absurd. Anyway, now that I've talked a lot about attack and defense, because like I said, it's very important to get this around to you guys, let's keep going. Next up, that we have the effective attack and defense, we now know the base damage. Now, if we were to look ahead a little bit in what the next part is, now that we know the base damage, we need to figure out what the adjusted damage is. This basically means there's a whole bunch of modifiers, percentage increases, percentage debuffs, buffs, status conditions, a whole bunch of stuff that can happen to increase or decrease the amount of damage we're dealing. This is where all of this is coming in now. First off, we need the disc modifier. What is the disc modifier? Funnily enough, there's two different types of disc modifiers, one for PvE, it says quest, and one for mirrors. Because in mirrors, your discs deal actually different damage than they do in PvE. We're going to get into this later. But first off, for our disc factors, they also get an awakening bonus. So if we go back to Best Girl and we look down here at our 5-star awakening bonus, we see that we get plus 7%. By the way, I didn't mention this earlier, but if you awaken a character, they lose their awakening bonuses, and you have to give them new awakening bonuses. So you don't get both of these rows, you only get the row you are on. So in this case, a 5-star Ren would get a plus 7% Excel and plus 7% Blast. This is where this one factors in. We have a base value for our disc, which we see down here, and this base value then gets increased by this, and then there's some charge shenanigans. But first off, Base value. What are the base values for our discs? There are, it says here, 4 different types of discs. Actually, there's 6. I'm going to tell you about this later. But first off, we have the Excel disc, which is like the most standard disc you can think about because it does 100% damage. So it does like normal damage. So we have our 100% regular damage this deals. On top of that, we multiply that with the 7%, which basically means multiplied by 1.07. So once we have that, let's just imagine we don't have charge. Then this would mean that our Excel disc would do 107%. If we were to be in a Puella combo and we used an Excel disc, let's say we have like a combo that's like A, C, and then B. That's as a Puella combo. That first Excel disc would do 120%. Then you multiply that with a 1.07, which is, I don't know how much that is. Calculator, give me. So 120 times 1.07 is 128.4. Yeah, that's the thing. So you get 128.4 if you had this Ren with 7% Excel bonus. Nice. Now we look at charge disc. Charge disc normally does 80% damage, so it's terrible. Charge disc by itself is terrible, but at least in a Puella combo, like let's say we are in that ACB combo, that second disc, that charge disc, would do 120% damage. Nice. So we see that in a Puella combo, Excel discs and charge discs do equal damage. Nice. Fun thing to note, if you have an Excel Puella disc, Excel Puella combo, so say you have AAA in a Puella combo, doesn't actually deal more damage. In fact, if you just had an Excel combo, like I say, you had 2 different characters that together create an Excel combo, it would still just do 100% damage. You don't get a damage increase on an Excel combo. You also don't get a damage increase on a charge combo. The only thing that actually increases the amount of damage you get from these discs is the Puella combo. So that's why Puella combos are really important. Puella combos are pretty much always more important than other types of combos, unless you use Excel combos, because Excel combos are really good. Now it says also that there's Blast, which Blast discs are just weird. Blast discs are like wee, and there's also Magia disc, which Magia discs are also like wee, also kind of weird. There's 2 more types of discs that I can mention right now. There's the chase disc and there's the counter disc. The reason why they're not mentioned in here is because you cannot select chase and counter. If a character were to attack with a chase, so for example, your Ren, your best girl, connects with someone, which gives them chase, and then your Ren were to attack again, and it would trigger that other person's attack. That other person who then chases attacks basically with a chase disc. That's how it works internally. Internally, that chase is like an invisible disc, and that invisible disc is a chase disc. How much damage does a chase disc do? It does 80% damage. And how much damage does a counter disc do? A counter disc does also 80% damage. So if you're wondering how does chase and counter damage actually get calculated, just imagine they're attacking with a disc that deals 80% of its normal damage. That's basically it. Basically like a charge disc, like a blank charge disc in outside of a Puella combo. That's how strong a counter would be, or a chase would be. Next up, we need to talk about blast discs, because blast discs are a bit weird. So the base value, if it was up here, it would just say normal 600% for a blast disc. That's kind of bad, but Blast has some crazy increases. For example, if you have a Blast Puella combo, or just a Blast disc within a Puella combo, like for example earlier I said this ACB combo, this B would get a damage boost of 30%. I say 600%, 60%, sorry. So we see 60% and on top of that 30%. So this last Blast disc would deal instead 90%. It's already dealing more damage than that charge disc, but it's still not dealing more damage than the Excel disc. However, on top of that, depending on position, Blast also gets another bonus. So if the Blast disc is the first disc in the combo, it deals normal damage. If it's the second disc, it deals 10% more damage, so 1.1 times that. If it's the third disc, it deals 1.2 times that. So in this scenario, this ACB scenario, that third blast disc would not just be bumped to 90% because it's a Puella combo. It would also be then bumped by another 1.2 times modifier, which would bump it to, if you look down here, there's actually this one right here, 108%. So we'd be at 108%. This last blast would deal more damage than the other discs. Of course, it would have a charge bonus, but let's ignore charge bonus for now. The fun fact is, this also then gets increased again if it's in a blast combo. So a blast combo also adds this 30% bonus. So if we aren't in a Puella combo, we're just in a blast combo of 3 different characters. So if we have 3 different characters all use a blast disc, all those blast discs would get this 30% damage bonus. So once again, first disc would deal 90%, second disc 99%, and third disc 108% damage. Cool. So it turns out Puella blasts by themselves, if you use a blast disc outside of a Puella combo, outside of a blast combo, does nothing. 60% damage. Ooh, that's terrible. But if you use it within a Puella or a blast combo, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. In a Puella blast combo, blasters are like really good. But then on top of that, if it's a Puella and a blast combo, you get another 30%, and suddenly we do 120%, 132%, 144%. We are almost reaching double damage of a charge disc on each individual hit, because of course blast discs can hit multiple people. So if you had a Puella blast combo, the final blast disc does 144% to each individual of the 3 spots that it hits. So if you were to attack a boss that has 3 spaces, each individual space would get hit with a damage modifier of 144%. That's pretty absurd! This is also the point where you realize that it's pretty powerful to use Magia against bosses that have multiple spaces. Like an AoE Magia against bosses with multiple spaces is pretty good, but you could just use a Puella blast combo and you would still hit 3 spaces with like 144% each. Still pretty goddamn powerful. So you don't need Magia, you can just use Puella blast combos to deal with big bosses, and it's just as effective. And you don't need to waste 5 turns to get the MP for it. Turns out blast is actually unreasonably special. For some reason the developers really love blast discs. We still need to talk about one other type of disc though, which is the Magia disc. What do Magia discs do, or double discs? First off, I'm going to talk about the actual damage multiplier that Magia discs have. I can tell you right now, to figure out how much damage a Magia or a double disc actually does, you need to look it up. For example, you have the Magia of Ren. Well, it's this really weird type that is stronger the lower your HP is. So it's between these, but let's just say we're at full HP, so it does 600% damage to a single enemy. So if we compare that to, for example, our Excel disc that's 100% damage as a normal disc. So you could say that, for example, Ren's Magia at full HP just deals 6 times the damage that a normal Excel disc would do. However, there's still some more special stuff going on because it's not quite that simple. First off, Magia and double discs cannot trigger a Puella combo. So you know how in a Puella combo your Excel disc does 120% at least? Yeah, your Magia can't do that. Your Magia does not trigger Puella combos, and because it can't trigger combos, it cannot get increased damage from a Puella combo. Magia really just does what it says on the tin. If it says it does 600% damage, it just does 600% damage. You don't get any bonuses from that. Of course, you also can't charge them, so also no charge bonus. But we will see later that there's at least a Magia damage bonus. We'll get to that. So because they can't point towards Puella combos, that's kind of sad, but at least there's still some cool bonus stuff that Magia and double discs can do, and they can combo. So other than blast disc, which also have some weird combo potential, but in a blast disc, with a blast disc, it just matters which position is the disc on. So in our ACB example, that last blast disc got the 3rd position bonus, and it got this multiplier right here. With a Magia, you also have a similar bonus, but the position doesn't matter. The position doesn't matter. What matters is how many Magias you combo with each other. How do you combo Magias? You just use one after the other without any other disc in between. So if you were to use a Magia, then a charge, then another Magia, that's not a combo. That's not a Magia combo. But if you were to use like a Magia, and then a charge, that second Magia would benefit from a Magia bonus. Best of yet, let's say you use 3 Magia discs. The second disc gets a Magia combo bonus. The third disc also gets a Magia combo bonus. How strong is this Magia combo bonus? Well, it says right here. Regularly, it just does base damage. If you do a second Magia disc in a row, that second Magia disc gets a 1.1 times modifier. The third Magia disc, so if all 3 are Magia discs or double discs, they're interchangeable, that last disc would get 1.2 times damage. So if you have a really, really strong Magia or a really, really strong doppel, and then maybe like 1 or 2 who aren't that strong, always use the weak ones first and the strong one last. Always use the strong one last in a combo, so then the last one, the strong one, gets all the damage bonuses. Nice. Now that we have that out of the way, what is charge? What actually is charge bonus? So if you have a charge bonus and you use an Excel disc or you use a blast disc, then of course you will get bonuses from those charge points. How strong are those bonuses? Well, it kind of depends. First off, Excel and blast get different types of bonuses. The Excel disc gains bonus damage and bonus, I can actually interact with this, bonus damage and bonus MP generated. How much? It says right here. If you use an Excel disc and you have 1 charge, you do 1.1 times the damage, like 10% bonus damage, and you also get 10% bonus MP. Nice. All the way up to 20. Oh my god, I did something here. No, how? Oh god, what is going on? Okay, all the way up to 20. Can this get better? Oh my god, I'm so sorry, guys. This goes all the way up to 20, where you would do 3 times the damage and 3 times the MP. It's quite alright, but gathering 20 charges just to get 3 times the damage and 3 times the MP on a single Excel disc, that's kind of bad. As it turns out, charge is really bad for Excel because you don't get that much use out of it. But let's compare it to blast. A single charge already increases your blast damage by 40% to 70%. 3, you're already dealing double damage. If you use a blast disc with 3 charges, you're already dealing double damage. That's quite absurd. Something to note though is, now that it won't show as well, but the scaling gets kind of worse. So it takes 3 charge discs to deal double damage. So you might think, okay, if I get 3 more, if I get to 6, does that mean I deal triple damage, quadruple damage? No, it actually gets worse. You do only 2.7 times the damage. I think this might be because of it goes, the scaling might be from charge to charge point instead of absolute charge points. Whatever, mathematics. Who cares about mathematics? What you need to take away from this though is stacking a whole lot of charge points to get a single attack out of it is terrible, which is yet another reason why charge is terrible. Not only do charge discs outside of bullet combos do like no damage, and they don't even get bonus damage within a charge combo, the actual charge benefit is kind of terrible in scaling. Once you have a lot of it, you kind of want to just have like 1 to 3 charge points, and then you want to use them on a blast. You don't even want to use them on an Excel. So you only need a handful of charges, and you only need them for blast discs. Why would anyone play purely for charge? If you want to play a charge, this entire thing would have to look very different. You would have to, it should say something like 50 times down here at 20 charges if charge was supposed to actually have a use, or 30 times for Excel if this was supposed to actually be good. Kind of sad. Now, what is the charge damage buff? This exists only on like 1 or 2 Memoria or like 3 girls in the entire game. It's this thing where it says charge up. Fun fact, charge up doesn't make charge discs better. It sounds really sad because I just told you how terrible charging actually is, and now I'm telling you that charge up doesn't actually make charge discs better. It just makes the use of charging better. So charged attack damage up, what that basically means is that you get a damage buff when you use an attack that uses charge. For example, if you were to use a 3 charge blast and then you had something like in here, charged attack damage up 15%, you would then get 15% bonus on top of that too. So I think so it would be like, instead of 2 times damage bonus, it would be a 2.3 times damage bonus, which is quite alright. But the thing is, like I said, this just makes it just makes some of the numbers in this spreadsheet a bit higher. But that's it. It doesn't actually make the charge disc itself better. If you play, don't put this on a character like Momoko. Don't put this on charge characters. Please don't. Don't ever put something like this on a character that is a charge gorilla. Because charge gorillas probably aren't going to use the charge points. Other characters are going to use the charge points. Put this on something, it sounds weird, but if you have like a Tart, this is better on Tart than it is on Momoko. Because Tart is going to use the charge points, not generate the charge point. This is on people that are users, not generators. Okay, good. Get this out of the way. Not that it matters, because like I said, there's only like 2 or 3 of these effects in the entire game. You can actually check where even is this. Why does Magia so slow? So there's a bunch of characters who have this as a connect, like Momoko has this. Some get it for spirit enhancement, some have it on their Magia. Memoria also a bunch, but most of these are like 3 stars or 2 stars even. There's not really any good Memoria that has it on them, other than one Memoria, which is one of the best Memoria in the entire game, but mostly because it has 25% attack up. That's actually mostly why this is that good. Anyway, away from that tangent, let's continue on. Now that we know about the charge damage buff, which isn't really that important, we are able to understand what the actual disc bonus is. Now we know the damage factor of our disc. Nice. So now that we know the damage factor of our disc, if we go back up again, we have in here, we know the base damage from our attack and defense calculations and stuff. We have the disc value that gets multiplied in here. So let's say this charge blast or whatever does like 50% bonus damage. So now we have our base damage times 1.5. And now we need to worry about attributes. So basically elements. Fire attacking into forest, for example. What is the actual damage implications for that? So if we look at the attributes for this, if we are at a weakness, we deal half damage. It is a bit odd in Japanese language. But if we attack into an element that we are weak against, we deal half damage. If we attack into an element that we are strong against, so for example fire attacking into grass, we deal 1.5 times the damage. Nice. Something to notice, it also says something here, is there is an effect that increases damage from weakness. I'll get to that later, but just know that it comes into play in this attribute mashup factor. Okay, there's also another thing like attribute strength and damage effect. Like I said, we're going to get into that later. First off though, that's basically all that you need to know about attribute. It's mostly just half damage or 1.5 times bonus damage, and there might be some other special stuff later. The most important bit now though is the modifiers, because the modifiers is just a giant pool. It's just a giant pool with a whole bunch of stuff in it. What kind of stuff is in there? Well, if you were to believe the fandom wiki, your damage buffs is this pool, and this pool has in it critical modifier applied on a critical hit. This is a lie. Critical modifier is not part of damage buffs pool. It is instead separate. This is the damage buffs pool, and this is a separate critical modifier. I did some maths to test this out just very quickly. I did some maths on Japanese stuff. Just trust me. I did maths. It does check out. The critical is not part of the total damage modifier. Why is that important? I'll tell you later why it's important. For right now, just hang on to that knowledge. Hang on to the knowledge. Grab it. You're going to need it later. But right now, let's take a look at the actual pool of our damage buffs. And you'll see that there's a whole bunch of damage buffs in here. By the way, if you see something like 100% plus or 1 plus, you can just ignore that. It's just mathematical speech. It's just math speech for making percentages work out. Just ignore this. This is the actual damage pool. damage buff pool. So we have damage and we have blast damage up, bad damage up. Why is there damage up and damage? It's because the game is just I don't know, but the game does this. We have damage up, which is this, which is also called damage inflicted up, which is also just called damage. Then we have damage increase, which is also called damage inflicted up, which is the other one. This is damage inflicted up. This is damage increase. This is also called, damage increase state for some reason. So if you're Japanese, you might also see this as damage in, like this says damage up state. So we have damage up state, which is actually damage increase, but on NA it's called damage up, while in here we have damage up, which is actually called damage inflicted up, which is a buff, while this one is a granted effect. Why is there... They could have just named it two different things in everything. Why did it have to be so closely named? Why is this... Why? Anyway, naming aside, the only thing you need to know is that they both factor into the same pool. We have damage increase, which is this, and we have damage up, which is this, which for some reason is also called damage up condition and damage... I don't even care, dude. I don't even care anymore. The only thing you need to know about this is it's in the same pool and one is a buff while the other is a granted effect. Why is it important that they're separate buffs, and why is it important that one is a buff and that the other one is a granted effect? This was something that I also mentioned in an earlier video about status conditions, about buffs, debuffs, and status ailments. Buffs and granted effects, everything that has a value attached to it, like 50%, 100%, whatever, can go at maximum to 100%. So you can get a maximum of 100% damage increase, and you can get a maximum of 100% damage up separately, okay? So because they're two different buffs, you can get 100% damage up and you can get 100% damage increase separately, and they will combine to be 200% damage increase total. Nice. So by having these be two different buffs, it allows you to get more damage. That's good. Also for decreasing these values, it's important this is a buff because buffs have counterparts. Buffs have debuffs. There is a damage debuff, which is this, which granted effects don't have. Granted effects don't have these counterpart debuffs. Only buffs have these counterpart debuffs, which is why it's called buff debuff and granted effect. This thing, basically this thing doesn't have a counter, is what I would say if damage cut didn't exist, but we get to damage cut later. This is for later, don't worry about it. Just for now, notice that this thing has a counterpart, which is the damage down, or damage inflicted down. Names. And basically if you have like 100% damage up and you were to get hit by 150% damage down, you would actually drop to in total a minus 50% damage down. If you had 100% damage up and you get hit by 50% damage down, it would drop down to 50% damage bonus. So you would still have a damage bonus. It would just get lowered by 50%. So it's like I said, it's a slider that goes up and down. If you want more info on this, I'm not going to reiterate too much. Go on the video I did on buffs, debuffs, and status ailments. I did make a mistake though in that video. I said the minimum you can have is a minus 100% damage down or defense down or whatever down. It's not right, it goes to 95%. So the minimum value is 95% that you can have, like minus 95%, because 100% damage down would mean you deal no damage, and they kind of don't want that, so 95% is the floor. Now that we have that out of the way, we know that we have this damage buff, we have the damage up buff, damage increase, damage up, the two different things that go into this. We also have the blast up. So you know, for example, the passive Tsuruno Memoria or the active Kyoko Memoria, they deal blast up, which actually does increase the damage from blast discs. That's what this does. There's also the Excel up. Excel up doesn't actually increase the damage from Excel. Otherwise, it would be somewhere in here. Instead, Excel up increases the amount of MP you get. By the way, I just realized I skipped over the disc calculations for mirrors. I'll get to that later. But for now, know that Blast Up is the only one of the disc buffs that actually increases the disc damage, because Charge Up doesn't increase the disc damage of charged discs, and Excel Up doesn't increase the disc damage of Excel discs, it just increases the MP. But Blast Damage Up actually increases blast damage. You also have Damage Up Bad. What does that mean? Well, there are some effects in the game that say, well, I say some, there's only like 2 or 3 in the entire game. If you look at Memoria, that's basically all there is to it. And it's just damage up versus enemies inflicted with status ailments. If your enemy is inflicted with a status ailment, which, once again, watch the other video, is this purple effect, like curse, bind, stun, whatever, any of these, then you will deal 32.5% bonus damage with this one, which would go into this pool right here. And there is one thing that can counteract these modifiers, and that's Damage Cut. Damage Cut is a granted effect. That's what I said earlier, is kind of the counter to damage increase. Even though it also counters damage up, it counters both of these. It's the Damage Cut, it's also called Reduced Damage. It's this thing right here. It just reduces the damage by whatever. So this is something that some characters have on them as a damage cut. So for example, you see a bunch of percentages right here, like for example right here, Futabasanas Connect gives 100% damage cut. This doesn't mean that the opponent deals 0 damage, it just means that the enemy's damage modifiers get reduced by a 100%. So of course though, if you had like 200% on this left side, then you would still deal 100% bonus damage. So you still deal less damage, but if the opponent that's attacking you still has a lot of buffs, it doesn't really do a whole lot. So damage cut is really good against opponents that have low modifiers, but against opponents that already have high modifiers, doesn't do that much. Okay, now I said earlier that it's really important that critical is not part of this equation. And why is that? Because this right here has a cap. This right here has a cap. I already told you that each individual effects in here can only go to a maximum of 100%. So you could try and calculate, okay, let's say about 100% damage increase, 100% blast, 100% damage up bad, 100% damage up. I could get a 400% damage bonus, right? No. Because this right here is capped to 200% damage bonus. You're only allowed a 200% damage bonus, or if you want to be mathematical, this entire thing can only reach a 3,000 per mil, which it says right here, 3,000 per mil. But basically, if all these 4 were at 100%, you wouldn't get 400% out of it, you would get 200% out of it. Kind of bad. So this thing has a cap, but since critical is not part of this, this always means that even if you are stacked up on all of these and are hitting the cap, if you do a critical hit, you will still get a plus 100% bonus damage. So if you had a bonus damage of, let's say, 250% and you were to crit, you would then reach 350%. If instead this was correct, and you already had 250% total, like 200% from these. So if you already had 250% total and you were to get a critical hit, if this was correct, you would bump into 300% instead of 350%. But like I said, I did some testing, I did some maths, this is correct. You do indeed bump to 350% instead of bumping into the cap. Which basically means you can always, you don't have to worry about overcapping on all of your damage buffs and then not actually dealing that much more bonus damage with criticals. Criticals will always deal bonus damage. That is basically why this is important, because if this was correct, criticals wouldn't always deal bonus damage. There would be situations where criticals wouldn't deal bonus damage. If you had a plus 100% blast damage up, which you can easily get, and then a whole bunch of connect bonuses, like I say, you get connected and you get a whole bunch of these 2 bonuses, you could reach a situation where your critical hit wouldn't deal bonus damage. But because this is correct, critical hits always deal bonus damage. That's basically what I wanted to show you guys. So now that we know all of that, we have all this pool that all of these damage modifiers get thrown into, we can look up again and we see that basically we now know the amount of damage that our attack is going to deal. There's one part. What if we aren't using a regular disc? What if we are using a Magia disc? Because if we're using a Magia disc, something else goes on top of the damage we're doing. Because you might know that there's this little status effect that some characters can get, or some Memoria staff, which is called a Magia Up. And you might have noticed that this Magia Up was not actually part of these modifiers. Why is that? Because the Magia damage buff gets multiplied on top of this. So Magia Damage Up is more powerful than Attack Up or Damage Up or Damage Increase Up, but Attack Up, Damage Increase Up will still increase the damage you are dealing. Because I know a lot of people usually ask, how good is Magia Damage Up? And I always tell them, yeah, just go for regular damage up, right? Because regular damage up, like Attack Up, all of this stuff also makes you deal bonus damage, right? Magia is just more of it. The only times when Magia Up is important is when you have a character that is literally only going to deal damage with their Magia. Very important, for example, in Accomplish events, where you know these events where you have to go fight for like 100 challenge floors, and if your characters die, they're dead for a few hours. On those types of events, you know that you can start a stage with a character having Magia. And if you start a stage with a character having Magia, with a character having Doppel, you can then give them a Magia Damage Up, and it will be very effective because it gets applied to your entire damage. It doesn't get thrown into this modifier pool, because all of these modifiers being in the pool, meaning that they kind of weaken each other, they're not really that powerful, but being outside of the pool means it's a lot more powerful. So, that all gives us the adjusted damage, but you might be thinking to yourself, but Raz, my characters aren't always dealing the exact same amount of damage. Why is that? Well, the reason is because there's a bit of randomness. So after all of this has been calculated, they give you a randomness of like plus minus 5%. So your attack can randomly be 5% weaker or 5% stronger or anything in between that. We don't know what the distribution is. Like, we don't know if it's more likely that your attack deals regular damage compared to it being less likely that your attack deals 5% less or 5% more damage. But it's important to know that there is some randomness being there just because it's more interesting if there's randomness, right? So yeah, that's basically it. There's a bunch of glossary for a bunch of stuff. Most of the stuff is translated from Japanese. So a lot of the stuff that is down here doesn't really match up with the English names. So if you read this, you might see names in here like restraint that you like, what is restraint? I don't know this. This is called bind in English. So yeah, don't worry about this down here. Gonna minimize it. And yet, okay, now the scrolling is out. So there we go. That's basically all there is to know for now. But I need to go back to the disc bonus in mirrors because I accidentally skipped over this. Basically, in mirrors, discs deal a bit less damage. It's just that simple. All discs deal 0.7 times the damage. So all discs you can see are just worse in mirrors. Apart from blast discs, which, I mean, they also get multiplied with this 0.7 times, right? So they are still worse. But their base damage is higher for some reason. Like, you know, it's 60% in Quest, and here it's 70%. So blast discs are stronger comparatively in mirrors. So if you compare the strength of blast discs to an Excel disc, for example, in a Quest, it's not that blast disc isn't as powerful comparatively as it is in mirrors, where in mirrors, if you compare a blast disc to an Excel disc, that blast disc is actually more powerful. So that's weird. We don't know why. I guess they really, really love charge discs in blast discs in mirrors, and they really hate all the other discs in mirrors. But what you need to know is just that blast discs are just better than other discs in mirrors. So what is that for? I was about to make a quip at Magia in mirrors, but I haven't even told you guys that Magia and double discs also deal half damage in mirrors, because they don't want it to, they really want Axel to not be that great. Of course, you can do Axel strategies that are fairly effective. I'm not saying you can't do Axel strategies. It's just that the game kind of doesn't want you to, because Magia and double deal half the damage. That basically makes it so that enemies have a really good chance of surviving a Magia, or maybe even a double. Maybe not a double, but they have actually a really good chance of surviving a Magia in mirrors. And the Excel discs that you use to get to the Magia are also weaker than if you just used, oh god, what is this? If you just used a blast disc. So mirrors kind of just wants you to use blast discs, and if you use Excel discs, they kind of go like, yeah, but you have to deal with these downsides, you know? And charge discs are always terrible, so who cares about that? For some reason though, charge discs also are worse. Like I said, I told you guys that Excel already has these, is nerfed. Magias deal less damage, but at least charge discs, they might be a bit nerfed, but can we at least use charge discs? Please let us use charge discs in mirror. But the game once again says, actually we also hate charge discs in mirrors. Can you just use blast discs? It's like whoever designed these numbers is basically reaching through the camera and trying to shake you. Use blast disc, you idiot, use blast. Why is the designer doing this? Why are they doing this? Because charge damage is worse in mirrors. If you use any attack that uses up a charge point, that attack will do 0.9 times the damage it would do otherwise. So for example, you look up here and you see this double damage for a blast disc. In mirrors, it wouldn't deal double damage. It would do this 2 times and then multiply it again with 0.9, which I think is like a 1.8. So in mirrors, this would do 1.8 instead of double damage. So it's a bit worse. Basically, it makes every number in here worse in mirrors. The absolute crazy part is, and I even points this out here, the absolute crazy part is, if you look at Axel Disc 1 and you multiply this by 0.9, you end up with 0.99 base damage. Meaning, and I can't believe this is actually true, if you use a charge disc, and then an Excel disc in mirrors, and you have one charge point that you throw into that Excel disc will deal 1% less damage than if you didn't use a charge for it. Your charge makes your Excel worse if it's just a single charge disc. I can't believe this is actually real. I mean, it even says, I can't believe, this is, how stupid is this? Guys, just use blast in mirrors, okay guys? Just use blast. Don't care about Excel, don't care about charge, just use blast. This is not me being biased towards blast. I love blast characters. This is me just telling you, these numbers hate everything that isn't blast. Just so the game kind of tells you, use blast, please. Anyway, that's basically most of what I wanted to talk about. We've gone through the entire thing. I've basically given you some info. Once again, to go over some of the info. Damage increase and damage up, they're two different things. Means you can stack both individually, and it's better than just stacking one of them. And if you were to just stack one of them, like if you were to just stack damage up, if you were to just stack this, for example, you would overcap at some point. Like let's say you use multiple of these connects on one character, or you also on top of that use a Memoria that increases this. You could overcap. If you go over 100%, this does nothing. Instead, use some damage increase as well on top of this. Use both. Because if you use both, it's a lot less likely to accidentally hit the cap. Nice. Also, something to note is, because defense is a lot more important if you have a lot of defense, or defense is also a lot more important if you have a lot of less attack, or just in general, if you have a lot more defense than attack, defense is really powerful and your attack won't do much damage. This basically means that you want to counteract your opponent's defense as much as possible. How do you counteract your opponent's defense? Now with everything you know that damage up, damage increase up, none of this blast up, none of this makes it easier to overcome an enemy's defense, because all of this gets applied after the enemy's defense has already crippled your attack. If you want to actually get across an enemy's high defense, you can't use any of this. You need to use stuff like defense down debuffs, of course, defense down debuffs, but even more so, if you want to overcome an enemy's defense and make your attacks do a lot more damage, just get more attack. Just get more attack. Just get this. Just get a whole bunch of this. This is probably the best damage, the best way of increasing your damage is to just increase your base attack, because the more base attack you have, the easier it is to make your enemy's defense basically poof. Every single point of damage makes your opponent's defense mean less and less. And then once you have overcome the enemy's defense, and once you have a lot of base damage, that's when you have all your cool modifiers that make you even more powerful. So one thing to note though is, of course, once again, this attack buff and defense buff, this defense debuff. If you want to debuff your enemy's defense, you can at most debuff them by minus 95%. If you want to buff your own attack, you can have at most 100% buff. This means that the answer isn't to just stack all of these effects, because once you reach 100% attack up, you can't go anywhere. Also, if you are already at like 80% attack up, and you get another 20% attack up, going from 80% to 100% bonus isn't that much of an increase in absolute terms. But if you had no damage increase buffs, and you say, okay, instead of giving myself a 20% attack up to go from 80% to 100%, I'm going to go from 0% damage increase to 20% damage increase. That actually helps a lot more. So you do want to have a balance. You do want to have a balanced spread of multiple buffs, but you always want to prioritize attack up, and you always want to prioritize enemy defense down in defense debuffs, which is pretty good. If also you want to take less damage, of course you also want to prioritize defense up and prioritize attack down on enemies. If you want to take less damage, damage cut isn't that important. Damage cut really isn't that important, because it gets applied after defense has already taken effect. It's a lot better if you just have a lot of defense. Increasing your defense is just a lot better. But once again, like I said earlier, if you have 80% attack up, got 100% attack up, 20% is not a big increase, but 20% attack damage up. Oh, it's the same with defense. If you're already at 80% defense up buff, you might want to look into damage cut as a buff. You still want to have a balance of the two, but in that balance, you still want to prioritize attack and defense. Those are like the most important things. There's like this, Meteor Ray. There's like this Memoria that everyone loves. This one, Quell Bloom, I call. I say this is one of the best Memorias in the game, because it gives enemies attack down and defense down, let's say 50% across the board, which is pretty absurd. With everything that we've just learned, this is pretty absurd, because it makes you deal a lot more damage and makes the enemy deal almost no damage. If you use this in a challenge quest, for example, so let's say, for example, your team gets hit with 10,000 damage a turn from enemy attacks, you might think, damn, 50% attack down might not be that effective, because I'll just take like 5,000 damage in turn, like, right? Because 50% attack down means 10,000 goes to 5,000. But because of all the stuff we know about defense, remember our defense stuff from earlier? If we were to halve someone's damage, someone's attack, they wouldn't do half damage. They would do a way less than that. So if we go back to that challenge quest, and that opponent hits your team for 10,000, and you give them like a 50% attack down, they might only hit you for like 1,000 that turn. It's that insane. Attack and defense is actually absurdly insane to manipulate. Raising your owns, lowering your opponents, those are the important effects. But giving an opponent something like a damage down doesn't actually do that much. Like, you might know in Memoria that's Warcry. Where is it? Negotiator. This one is still pretty good. Damage down 50%, it's still pretty good. But think about it this way. we just saw how incredibly effective attack down 50% is, lowering an opponent's attack from 10,000 to 1,000. That's absurd. But let's assume we use something like Warcry, like Negotiator, with the damage down on an enemy team, and let's assume that enemy team has attack buffs. Let's say that enemy team, for example, has a 100% blast up and is using a blast disc. Now, that total damage that guy does is like 200% of their normal damage because they have 100% blast up. Hitting them with a damage up down of 50%, that would mean that they would, instead of doing 200% damage, they now do 150% damage. That's a decrease of only 25%. So in the same vein, their 10,000 damage would go to 7,500 damage. Because like I said, if you try to do something like damage down against someone who already has a whole bunch of damage modifiers, or damage cut against someone who already has a bunch of damage modifiers, it doesn't really do anything. It's pretty much terrible. So even though, this basically, like I said, I wanted you to follow through with me throughout this entire video so that you now also understand why Reliable Negotiator, it's pretty good if the opponent doesn't have damage buffs, but if the opponent does have damage buffs, Negotiator isn't quite that reliable. Instead, something like this, like Quellbloom, is absolutely insane no matter what buffs your opponent has. Unless they have like 100% attack up, but who fucking has 100% attack up in mirrors? Holy shit. That's basically what I wanted you to take away. Attack and defense, great. Damage up, damage down, damage cut, not that great. But if you want to maximize effectiveness, you still need a balance. Balance, but attack up, but attack and defense, they're in the focus. Now it's time for some frequently asked questions that I can go into and give you guys just a little bit more of a take if you guys want to stay for some bonus. If you don't want to stay for the frequently asked questions that I'm answering right now, remember to leave a subscribe. Yay. Now, a question that I've been asked: does type advantage and debuffs count into the 200% damage boost pool that I mentioned earlier? No, because if you look at the damage pool, none of the stuff in here is type advantage and debuffs. Although, I guess it depends on if he means damage up against, like this thing, damage up versus enemies afflicted with status ailments, that is in here. But if we think about something like type advantage, and I think he means the increased damage against types. Like for example, let's go back up to attributes. We're already at the attributes right here. Nice. We see here that regularly, if we are effective against an opponent, we have 1.5 times the damage. Now, if instead our opponent is inflicted with a status ailment that increases the amount of damage we do, if you aren't quite sure what I mean with this, oh god, where is it? I think we find it. There are some status effects, like for example here, stun, that says enemy takes increased damage from weak element. If it says that an enemy takes increased damage from weak element, what that means is this 1.5 instead becomes 1.8. So damage, so this right here, this effect is not part of damage modifiers anywhere, it's part of the attribute damage modifier. So this has nothing to do with the cap, this goes straight past the cap of that we see down here with the modifiers. This is really nice. There's also the weak to attribute strength and damage effect. I need to see if I can find someone that has that, because some Magias in the game have like this, for example, Akame Homoda, Mizugi version, attribute strength and damage one enemy. So she's a light type, so if she attacks a dark type, she does attribute strength and damage, which means that all of this, what we're seeing right here, this 1.8 or this 1.5, if it's just base, this 1.5 then gets multiplied again with another 2. So this 1.5 times becomes a 3 times, and in 1.8 times it become a 3.6 times. Oh, so attribute strength and damage, it's nothing to laugh at. It actually does a lot of damage if you attack someone of the weak element. And once again, not part of the damage cap, it's completely different. Next up, things like damage up versus enemies with status ailments, that is indeed part of the cap. Damage reduction from defense is scaling linearly. Are there certain percentage breakpoints? No, because defense is just a linear subtraction. There's no percentages involved anywhere, because I know some games say something like, oh, if you have 10 defense, you get 20% damage decrease, and if you get like 11 defense, then you have 25%, something like that. Nothing like this exists in the game. There are no breakpoints and no percentages involved anywhere with defense. It's just completely linear. Do attack and defense bonuses from formation contribute to the cap? Or rather, like for example, let's say we have a 90% attack up and we put our guy on a formation that gives 25% attack up. Does that mean we've overcapped? No, because attack buff is separate from effective attack, which has a formation. So the formation is part of a completely separate pool and therefore does not factor into the cap, which also makes formation buffs pretty strong. Next up, is the cap for the Magia Damage Up buff also at 100% like other buffs? Yes, every single buff and every single buff that you see in this list is capped at 100%. If you have a granted effect that also has a value, like for example, Damage Up, also is capped at 100%. Next up, how is Magia Damage calculated in mirrors? It just deals half damage. That's basically it. How is Magia Damage calculated at all? Like earlier, I showed you in Ren's Magia, it says here 600%, and like I said, it basically just means it's counted as a disc that just does 600% damage. Like for example, regular Axel does 100% damage, this 600% damage. Nice. How are essential material bonuses to stats and discs factored into the equation? As mentioned way at the beginning of this, the buffs that you get to discs and to attack are completely separate from absolutely everything else and are just slapped onto the base value. So it gets slapped onto the base value for attack and defense, and it gets slapped onto the base value for your discs. There's nothing else that factors into this, and Memorias, for example, do not get this bonus. Where in the equation is damage cut and reduced damage applied before or after reduction from defense? As we've seen, it gets applied really, really late, and interesting enough, like I said, if you had a 50% damage cut, doesn't mean you take half damage. It means the opponent's damage increase buffs get reduced by this 50% points. And that is all, of course, after defense has already taken effect. How does ignore defense interact with any of these caps? Ignore defense basically says if the ignore defense is active, this entire term back here just becomes 0. This all just becomes 0. It has enough. So no matter how much defense you have, defense up, defense down, nothing matters. This entire term just gets ignored. It's 0. Nice. So that's basically it. Hope you guys enjoyed all this. I hope you guys enjoyed the frequently asked questions as well. If you have any more questions, put them below. And if you want to see more Magia Record content, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And I'll see you guys next time.